Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing, show number 449, and a early happy St. Patrick's Day to all of you. My name is Lauren Gray, your host. Thank you so much for joining us. Yes, change of venue. We're in process of traveling and picked the prettiest venue of change that we can have before departure, which is our patio view. So decided to make something pretty and happy for us. Anyhow, want to get to a topic that probably won't take a lot of time today, but something that has been persistently coming up more for reasons of need rather than just curiosity. And that is the handling of data. What does it really mean? We hear so many buzz terms and phrases, and I notice that so many people head nod as if they understand the topic in the context of the conversation. But when I go back to them as friends and say, "Do you know that what that is?" A lot of times it's a guess, sometimes it's an assumption. Very rarely is it clear that they do understand what those things are. So I thought today would be a fun chance to kind of cover over some of the things related to data and terms that are being used by data and what's really viable and necessary to know from us from a hospitality perspective, hospitality marketing, hospitality revenue management, hospitality operations, hospitality in general. Because there's so much out there that services so many types of industry, and hospitality has its own unique needs, as we know, being in the industry. So our topic today is data lakes, data sources, data warehouses, data lakehouses. Actually, that's not the whole term of it, but why do we care? Actually, the topic, to be concise, data lakes, data sources, and data use. Why care? Um, we see these terms thrown around. It's like a new toy. People love, and just think about social media. People love when they discover something, and they want to share as if that's something that they know, and they want to show out to their friends that, hey, I know what this is, and I'm thinking about making a data lake. But when you really press them on it, they have no idea, or a vague idea, to be fair, as to what a data lake actually means and whether it's actually a useful function. To break some of these things down so that they're better understood as to their value proposition for us in hospitality, we have to understand what we would be using data for. So we're going to get to the end and talk backwards as to what seems to be the best sources for this. Our data use for hospitality is related to two specific variables that are highest importance for us, and that is market data, engagement with guests and customers and so forth, and revenue management data, revenue data, how we're producing, how it's being produced, and how we yield those productions. All of that data that we use for all of those things come from a variety of sources. We have PMS data, we have our PMS software services data, POS data, what most people refer to as tech stacks, your CRM data, your customer relationship management data. And if you're not familiar with how all of these work, just understand conceptually that CRM data is the data use of once somebody is booked, there is a confirmation email, there's a pre-arrival mail, perhaps if you're doing those things. There's an engagement email while they're with you. There's a post-stay email for follow-up, and then of course there's the perpetual engagements and communication, if done properly, through marketing with the CRM. Your PMS data, your property management system data, is really the backbone and point of truth for everything that's done, because that is truly the hub nexus position as to your transactions, your actual monies being made, stays being done, people staying in rooms, how much they spent, how many of those people, so forth, who they are, and so forth. So your PMS data ultimately is your point of truth. But you also have an internet booking engine, okay, your IBE. Your internet booking engine is usually is the platform that talks to your property management system that's handling your on property level processes via what people book online. They are actively engaged with the property management system to understand your data. You have your room availabilities, what rates you're asking for those, so forth and so on, promotions, packages, and what have you. Your internet booking engine, your IBE, usually has some very symbiotic relationship with your POS and PMS, excuse me, POS as well. So I don't think you're correct by saying that. And so there's a fluidity of connection between the two. Sometimes they're sourced as a tech stack coherently together. Your PMS system inherently has an IBE engine into it as well, so that they integrate seamlessly. Sometimes your tech stack may be two despairing ones where one talks to the other one, but they're two different services that you're being used for. All have their pluses, their negatives, mostly negatives when those things happen. To be clear, since I popped in the POS, property point of sale system, POS system, is the systems that you use within your food and beverage operations, your ancillary outlets, and so forth, that are your transaction gateways. Your restaurant POS, where people are paying for their food and so forth and so on. Having a charge to their room is a connection between the POS system and a PMS system. and on and on and on. So these are your frameworks of your tech stack, not all of it by any means inclusively, but is for the example purposes if we're talking about all of those systems have data. Take as a simple example, if I were to stay at a hotel and I booked online, my internet booking engine, okay, has data that was necessary to create the transaction for me for a reservation. It communicates with the PMS system. So when I contact the property or show up at the property, the PMS system shows of my purchase and what the conditions are of my purchase, as to how many days and what room type and what my rate was and so forth. And then if I go to the restaurant while I'm there and I purchase something and charge it to my room, it's put into my folio and property management system. And from that, I have a final bill should when I leave. That gives you a sense of how those connectivities work. Now, all of those have data, and all of that data doesn't necessarily get shared. Regrettably, your POS system keeps data for its own reasons, for transactions and so forth. But of course, it doesn't have the data as in similarity to what your PMS system would have, which is much more thorough with your actual physical address, your credit card information retained briefly as for rules and guidelines, but your transaction, your ability to create transactions and so forth, and where the source of the business came from and so forth. That's your PMS data. Did you do a group block? Was it a promotion code? Did it come as a walk-in? All that data is usually in your PMS. And to be honest, outside of walk-ins, your internet booking engine has its own sources of data as to where your transaction came from, what promotions, what rates were being offered, and so forth. Then the next level up of data that you begin to accumulate is the sources of the business as you track your internet profile, what you do, your Google ads, your Bing ads, your Facebook ads. All these have tracking capabilities as to what they know about the interaction of me going to the internet to book a room at your hotel. Your internet booking engine has the information from them, but your marketing campaigns and your analytics, and they're distinctly different. Your analytics of your website track all of the things that bring out the sourcing of what and where and how people interacted with you, what pages to the website they went to, what did they do when they were there, what did they engage with, how many times did they come back and to you, information from their sourcing as to what they engaged with outside of from you, which by our earlier shows, we've discussed the fact that third-party cookies are going away, but that doesn't mean that the data necessarily go along with it. We rely more and more heavily upon what's being reported to us via someplace like Google or Amazon, the AWS platforms, the larger platforms that do analytics. So this shows you the layering capability of all this. Now, and then you have Google Ads. If your Google Ads account is connected to your GA4 account, which it should be through your GTM shell, Google Tag Manager shell, which is like an all omnipotent holder of all these requested information pieces, then the information associated with your Google Ads also is fed into your analytics that's coming from your Google Analytics 4 program. And then in your Google Analytics 4 program, you're given a dashboard that they represent for you as to being data relevant to a Google Analytics program generically. It's not tailored to hospitality. It's in general representing the data that they see and what they think in general would you be interested in. The geography that people are coming into, how many people are actively on your website, how's your traffic now, how's your traffic yesterday, what channels are contributing, what's your referrals. This general data is what most people are familiar with in terms and usage for the most part. But then you have the additional data, of course, in individual platforms. Like in Facebook, you have more data in Facebook as to what engagement was for your social platform pages, your ad campaigns. They too have their segmentation from your ad campaigns in your business manager and your organic. What was engaged, how it was engaged, what profiles, what information that Facebook has about their users and their ecosystem. That's data out there too. So that's the data usages that we need. So stepping from that, going back into, well, how does that affect what I'm doing? Well, for whatever department that you work for, as you listen to my brief overview of all of this, your ears would perk up on the things that you do use and the things that you would like to know more about. Like, wow, I didn't know we could get that kind of information from analytics. If I'm a revenue manager, maybe that would be helpful for me to make better revenue management decisions or whatever. I don't think it should be a eureka moment for anybody for what I just said, but there are some times where you don't realize that there's this huge integration of data available on multiple platforms that can be helpful for our disciplines of marketing, revenue management, operations, and oversight of the programs that we do, monetization, finances, and so forth, from an ownership and corporate management program. So with the idea that these data exist out there, where do you get them? Okay, this is nice that it's there. Where are they? Now, we've had fun terminology like it's in the cloud. And yes, it usually is. More and more property management systems even rely less and less on local storage. One of the local storage being an actual computer box with a hard drive in it that's holding the data, and that is the point of truth data, meaning that that source there is all the data. Should that break or get flooded or destroyed, there's no other place that the data is actually at that detail elsewhere. That's dangerous, as you can see. People, they don't clean the vent or something. It gets clogged up. It burns out. It fries out. It stops spinning. Somebody pours coffee on it. Dangerous situation. So a lot of times, property management systems over the years have relied less on that as a storage of data and have relied upon a cloud connectivity of data. Now, it's fun to talk about when you lose internet or lose power that you're basically blind to how to operate your hotel because your data isn't with you. So if you're blanked out, you can't communicate with your data. You're disconnected. Of course, property management systems realizing this have created these abilities to have data that's relevant to a current operation, so that you know who your manifest is for, um, who's in house, your folio of who's in house, and what their status of payment is, and so forth. May not be able to process payments, but you at least know who has what and from where, and who should be here and who shouldn't, and so forth and so on. Key lock systems and so forth. They still operate even if you were to lose internet connectivity. But the idea of the data being stored is no longer just being on a local box where somebody can come in and get on the same computer that it's on and work on it. Instead, it's in the cloud. Well, each platform has its version of retaining data. Facebook retains its data. You look on its dashboard, you look in its business manager, and you look at its analytics, and you look at its information and determine what it's doing for you and what you're doing with it. If I want that data to talk to other data, I don't really have the ability to do that at face value. We'll get to how you do that. Because I have this data, but now the only data I have about Facebook is its referral or its engagement with other sources of data, like my website where I have my analytics. Facebook sent people over for what I did in Facebook to my webpage. Now I know that Facebook came over for that. If properly configured and tracked, I know what was sent over from what things, which ad it was sent from, which campaign it was sent from, which post it was sent from, whatever that direct connect by what's called UTM parameters, identification as to how what this is to be identified somewhere else. And so Google Analytics 4 will collect that, and they collect it from other sources. That any referral sources, your links that you put on, your relationships with other businesses, your local chambers and CVBs and so forth. You have the ability to track effectively all this data, and it goes into your analytics. And your analytics has the data for you to review. This is what traffic you got from. This is what it produced. And if you're good at connecting what it does and creating better reports, not the analytics standard dashboards that they offer, but actual reports in their Looker Studio, which is a platform Google offers for free. Create your own dashboards. You can create what it's producing for you, how it produced for you. There's a variety of ways. And we've talked about this a lot as to data manipulation in the sense of dashboards and reporting processes. That's been a focus of a few of our past shows here. But all of this data that we're talking about has to live somewhere. Now, Google, when they pushed the finalization of it being moved forward as of July last year, GA4, made a change that was very fundamental. Google Universal Analytics prior to July was called an ad infinitum. Because it tracked only session-based information, the data amount was very limited to what was singularly tracked by a person coming in and through that session tracked as to what they did. And for that reason, it was forever kept. With GA4, the inversion of everything being tracked and the definition of what you're looking for, which we've gone through in our sessions many times as to what the difference is, means that there's a vast amount of data that is perpetually being gathered. And Google said, since they're offering their analytics for free, smart them, is that they'll retain the data in its integrity for 14 months for you. After 14 months, aspects of the data, not all of it, but aspects of the data, mainly reporting functions, will go away. There'll be a dilution of that. Also, what they don't mention is in the process of your free Google's account, there are cap limitations as to how much data it can pull on its tracking in the sense of how much it's willing to pull. A good example of this is if you have a variety of room types, variety of room rate, variety of room projects. When you go up to a booking engine and you're tracking everything that's engaged with the tracking that you're doing on it, if you even have 4 or 5 promotions and you have 4 or 5 room types and you have conditions of each of those, you have hundreds of rooms being made available that are in the schema of the data that's being provided to the user. They see only 4 promotions, and under each promotion, they have the king suite, the king room, the doubles, the accessory rooms, the beachfront, the coastal view, whatever it is. All of those each have all the room types that the revenue manager person has put in as available for that promotion that you're looking at. So all that data is in the back to be gathered. Problem is, it happens all at once for the rendering of that page. And Google, if you don't set it up properly, will truncate it. It'll take it what it considers to be enough. Also, something with Google is that it does a lot of sampling data, heavy sampling data, meaning that in order to understand demographics, for instance, it won't take all of the demographic data that's available to it for you to see. It will sample the data that it has. That's interesting. I just made the fireworks go off. It will sample the data that it has to give you a good number. Now, this is not a bad thing. In the world of what we need it for most of us, this is sufficient. That's why Google has made that threshold. But all of this data only has a usability in complete integrity of 14 months. So you have to make a decision of if you want to keep the data, and you should already made that decision that you do, where do I keep it? And that's just Google's data, okay? The data we're talking about with your web engagement. Facebook, same thing, okay? This data is over there. What do we do with this? So Google has another platform, and there's other platforms out there, but we're talking about Google's in particular right now, has a platform called BigQuery. And they made it very affordable because, let's face it, they want us to be able to use it effectively. And what you do is with BigQuery, you connect it to your Google accounts, and you can store all your data in perpetuity. You end up paying for data very affordably based on terabytes progressively. You can picture that a lot of data, unstructured as it is, and unstructured is a term we'll get to, it doesn't occupy a lot of space, but cumulatively over time, it will. And it'll begin to build a bill. Sometimes it might be $5 a month, and 10, then up to 100. And we have clients that are in the thousands because they are dealing with massive amounts of data. They're dealing with millions of engagements. And because of that, all that data has to go somewhere, and we store it. So you have storage places like that. Now, you can use BigQuery, and we're going to keep focusing on it as an example, to store tons of data. But here's where it gets funny about understanding how data works in the terminology that you hear. And let's go through some of the terminologies that you hear. You heard me earlier in the beginning of the show refer to data lakes. Somebody says, oh, we're going to build a data lake. And I smile because a lot of people don't understand what that actually is. And if you ever want to trip them up or see if they do know, let's say not trip them up, you don't have to be malicious about it. Ask them, okay, so what made you choose that from that to being a data warehouse? And either you're going to get a frowny look because they don't really know the difference, or that they do know the difference. And here is the difference. Data lakes and data warehouses are both storage systems for big data, which is what we're talking about. We're talking about all this data, okay? We've heard that buzz term big data for years now. Data lakes store raw data, okay? While data warehouses store process data. So when you're doing a data lake, what you're doing is you're taking the data from any source and not predefining what the data is. You're taking it as is from where it is and putting it in a place that you now can go back to at whatever you want to. It's there. Now, when you do this, it adds a huge flexibility as to what you might want to do with it that you're not thinking of now that in the future tense would like to do with it. Like you don't know what you don't know right now, but 6 months from now, it might be, oh my gosh, let's go look at that. And you have the data in raw data in a way that you can extract from it the data that you're curious about knowing more about, compared to a data warehouse that has it formatted to the context of what you want for it. For lack of a better way of saying it, it's truly as the term for it is being cleaned up. It's organized, structured. Think of it as an Excel sheet with tabs, rows, and columns. It's been pre-identified and pre-correlated. That's fine for what you structured it for, okay? but it's not fine for if you need to restructure it to do something different than what it was structured for. So you have certain limitations associated with data warehousing that you don't have with data lakes. Okay. Now, there's other buzz terms that come up to it. You have lake houses. You're like, okay, so I have a lake and now I have a lake house. Um, Lake houses allow for combinations of two things. Lake houses allow you to connect to structured data warehouses, knowing how they structured the data, to unstructured data that you have in a data lake. It can do both. It's like you're on the side of the lake, okay, and you can get to access to all of your unstructured data that you have in the lake, but you also have the connectivity of other structured data warehouses to use in collaboration with your unstructured data. So it's more of a gateway combination between the two. What does this all mean to us for hospitality? Unless you're in this world to build it for other people, not really a whole lot. I think the real strongest takeaway of structured and unstructured data is the viability of usage of it. For most people, being familiar with the numbers that we grew up with, or most have grown up with, of how many people went to my website, how many people went to my booking agent, how many people booked to my booking agent, how much did they generate from those bookings, what's the percentage of people that booked compared to everybody that first came to our website, conversion rates, what channels did I produce, what was their conversion value, what was their production value, um, those kind of numbers are very familiar. And structured data is very good like that. And to be fair, Google Analytics as an account will give you that data in a very general term. It doesn't help down the granularity of certain channel contributions as well as it could. Remember, the Google Analytics dashboards, and I told you we go back to this, is built for everyone. So whether you're a hospitality professional, whether you're a retail professional, whether you're a service professional, whether you're a construction, manufacturing professional, the data on the analytics stays the same. It's the same format, it's the same screen, it's the same data points. Not all of them are relevant for every industry. We have different focal points of what we want from our data that a manufacturing company doesn't have the same of. A B2B or something like this doesn't have the same of. So you need to organize your data in a way that makes more sense for you as a hospitality marketer or as a hospitality revenue manager, that you need to have certain numbers that make sense in context to how you need to use them. This is where you want to create your own dashboarding, your own BI tools. There's a lot out there, Power BI and so forth, and they're expensive. You get a lot more than you usually need, and they price it so that they have to charge you enough to. For the small part you want, you end up paying for a lot more than you have. I'm not bashing BI tools, but there's a lot of pricing models that are to the benefit of the producer, not the user. And also, too, you have to understand what you're wanting it to do for um, your data use. You want to have the information drawn in, so you need to identify it. If you don't know how to make those identifications, then the terms of BigQuery, big data storage, structured data versus unstructured data begin to have more meaning. The nice part is Google tries to make it a lot easier for you in the sense that BigQuery will reside most of the data, and you really have to identify in terms that it uses for its analytics what you're looking for data in a report generation with Looker Studio. It's a free tool, good to use, great to get your feet wet into building your own dashboards kind of thing. But going back to this big data and data storages and data lakes and data and what have you, the one thing that has been progressively improving and interestingly high value is the idea of what you can do from where you can get the data. Before, it was not limited, but it was hard to connect your data storage, your data lake, okay, if you have an unstructured data program like BigQuery and what have you, um, to other sources of data, say like Salesforce and or Facebook. It made it very difficult. You had to use an API key, not to get too technical geeky, but that meant that you then would create a communication ability between two platforms, say Facebook and BigQuery, and you had to identify the data according to where you're trying to pull from, a GET, of what data they were making available and what they called it, and then identifying that data into your BigQuery as to what it meant on your side as to what it was identified for you to be able to use it. Those things have gotten easier in recent weeks, even where now Facebook has a much easier, more direct, more complete data flow that they've opened up that they can connect BigQuery to Facebook and get a larger scope of data. associated with your ad campaigns and performances and numbers that can be used as stored being in BigQuery in your dashboard creations with data. It gives you more in-depth data. Same too with other platforms like Salesforce and so forth. It doesn't change what you do with Salesforce as an example, or how they use it, what the CRM engagements are, and so forth. But the data that they have can be now brought into BigQuery. So one, you can keep it as you go forward, rather than having to always prevent, as long as you pay for Salesforce, they'll keep the data that you need to use, obviously. But the data and how it correlates to other data aspects you have, like your Google Analytics, your website engagements, and so forth. Knowing more about the engagement from your CRM side and connected to your web analytics side. Um, these additional data sources create huge insights. Some other examples of data that you can bring in. We've brought in some real fun API data, which is, again, the connectivity between sources and where we want it stored, um, of things like weather, the history of weather. We've been monitoring and tracking historical weather over all of our locations for a particular client, so that we will be able to retroactively go through in our year over year and see correlations of weather patterns associated with our business profile in whatever terms we wanted to have happen. And you might say, well, gee, that's Captain Obvious point, kind of thing. But it isn't necessarily a clear correlation. Sometimes there's different factors to it. And it may not be the only factor to it, but adding it into that collective knowledge is powerful. This is the way of using data lakes, data warehouses, storing data, and correlating with other data points that you have. There's so many other data sources: flight lift, airlift by airlines, um, gas station refills for traffic destinations, and so forth. All of this data is usable now by us that never was usable before. We had to look at one source of data, extract what we think would be interesting, look at another source of data, extract what we think is interesting, and manually compare it ourselves. And just the vast amount of data makes it very prohibitive, because we only then, to the point of sampling, would sample each and try to put it into a microcosm, trying to make a small comparison analysis based on a vast amount of data. Well, we now have these capabilities in data with data lakes, data warehouses, to be able to put all this data together and use all of it in our collective comparisons. That gives us better insights. So, going through some other terminologies that are related to data that are helpful. We've already mentioned data source, which is really the locational origin where data is collected and generated. Data dictionary. This is going to your structured program. Defining describes technical data terms such as data schemas, tables, and columns. This is the way that you, in your structure, organize and define data. Data cleansing. This is the process of removing, correcting, and detecting inaccurate or corrupt data, making sure that the data, because sometimes data can get reported, the next day it can get corrected for. Well, one of those data sources is incorrect. That has to be purged. That's a data cleaning. Data backup, kind of self-explanatory. Data migration, again, pretty much self-explanatory. Data replication, again, pretty duh. Data mining, and this is the process of discovering knowledge and patterns from large amounts of data. This is the correlation analysis, confidence analysis that you compare, like the weather data to your booking rate. And it's a single simple comparison, but there's a confidence factor. Is there a correlation between the changes in weather to your pattern of bookings? And there's a confidence factor of percentages. Says that this is 80%, 85, 90, 95%, 60%, whatever the correlation is. Confidence that there is a definite correlation, that as one effect happens to one, it has a correlation to the effect to the other. That's a result of data mining. Aggregate data. This is the summation of data in the sense of usability. This is what we really, as marketers and revenue managers, use, is the statistical summaries of the data, the impact of trend, the impact of conversion, the larger number, not the individual transactions so much as the cumulative action of the data. Microdata, it's a type of data which is singular to a function result of data. Don't get too granular with it, but basically once a reaction, a correlation, and or effective data reaches a data point, that's called a microdata. And that microdata then uses as a benchmark or milestone for correlations of other aspects of data. So it's accumulation to an accumulation is an easier way of referring to it. And then you have qualitative data, which is information that refers to the quality of something. The confidence factor that the data is as accurate as it can be, a confidence factor that this isn't just implied data, but this is actual hard individual transactions, all transactions for everything. That would be a qualitative data. Generalized averaging of ADRs, averaging of occupancies, that is not qualitative data. That's an implied data value. That's not as accurate as qualitative data. Those are some of the terms with it. So again, do not want to bleed over too much other than trying to get to the clarity of data. How do we use all of this? Marketing data is about knowing the effect of what we did and understanding the data that we need to know about what we should do next. Revenue management is about the effect of cause and effect between what's being decided upon and the resultant according to the predication of what we expected, and adjusting ourselves correspondingly. These types of data are things that are now able to be done with a much broader sense of all or more influences on the impact. Revenue managers have a myopic view sometimes that the setting of a rate or the availability of inventory type are the only two levers that make a difference. Again, if all you've ever had is crackers, then crackers is the only meal you know. These limitations are self-inflicted because that's usually been the only two effectual things that a revenue manager could use in their that's the only two tools they have in the kit. So because of that, everything is related to the cause and effect of the usages of those. A marketer has their channels of acquisition, their channels of conversion, their value propositions associated with those, and the opportunity to finite their targeting of those channels. Having more data about what that means to target, what that means as the result of that targeting, and what that means of what the channels they should use is the usage of the data that they've had. But that's a very self-limiting, again, the only tools in your toolkit are the ones you use, or as we like to say, if all you have is a hammer, everything begins to look like a nail. This limitation is being unfettered. We're now able to look at more cause and effect. Simple example is the weather one I gave. That the weather has a causation effect, does or doesn't. It could be whether or not there's segmentation of the type of drive market. The gas prices we know affect drive market. Well, now we have the data capability of taking that data in and seeing how it truly did define the changes in demand. Prices of gas based on the regionality of our drive market, specifically drive market to our hotel, is a usable data point that we can have. Looking back at data to the entire engagement of our website and realizing that we created error issues with the room configuration images that we had, that we were offering too many room types to too many promotions and pre-selling our highest demand rooms at a time where we should have yielded it closer to booking than it was to the package offer beginning, and squandering our yieldability of that room type. That's data that's usable now. These kind of things are the way that we need to start approaching what we have as data. Now, whether they're as a data lake, whether they're a data warehouse, whether you have a data lake to talk to your data warehouse and to your a data lake house to talk to your data lake, those are decisions that probably happen above what you're having to deal with. And for those that do have to deal with it, they need to understand how these things work together and what's best to work for them. The ability to aggregate data from platforms that they're using. These decisions don't just the vendor doesn't come out, knock on your door and say, "Hey, look, guess what? We're now able to have our data moved over to another platform." They don't want you to really necessarily use that. They want the reliance on what they're offering. So they're not going to be first to tell you that these are options for you. You have to be aware of these things that are coming out. See if that's a usable function. If at the very least to keep it to have as data as your own for historical reasons. Should you not be using that vendor or that software system in the future, at least having the data that they accumulated for you in a historical sense. Because now you have places to store these kind of things. You have more control over the data that you have access to. So there you have it. Discussion of data lakes, data sources, data use, why care. I hope it is helpful in the process of understanding some of these new ways that things are being approached and the data usage and data storage capabilities. We do have a lot of active conversations with our Hospitality Marketing Club. If you want to join us as a hospitality marketer, just go to hospitalitymarketing.club, put your email in, I'll send you a quiz. You pass the quiz, it means you're a marketer. You're not trying to learn it from scratch zero. It's a journeyman. It's a peer group, private, closed. It's not on Facebook or anything like this. It's on our own platform, and where we have open discussions about data usage, data APIs, new events, so forth and so on. You're more than welcome to join us. If you're catching us on our simulcast on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube, thank you so much for joining us. If you are catching us on our TV channel, the Hospitality Channel, which is in 209 countries, thank you so very much. Thank you for everyone that watches us at odd time zones. We do recast this at 11:30 a.m. Sydney, Australian time, 11:30 a.m. London, UK time for both our APAC friends, our EU and Mideast friends as well. So with that, that closes our show 249 down. My name is Lon Gray. Thank you for the privilege of your time, and I look forward to talking to you next week.